Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual meetup organized by H2O.ai. My name is Ivan Trehin and I am on the marketing team here at H2O.ai. Before we dive into our topic today, I would like to say a few words about our company and what we do for those who don't know us yet. So H2O was founded about 8 years ago, and we offer several platforms to make AI accessible to everyone. And we are the creator of H2O Open Source, a platform that is used by nearly 20,000 organizations. And we also offer an enterprise platform called Driverless AI. It is our product for automatic machine learning, and it helps accelerate the data science workflow. So if you would like to know more about us, feel free to get in touch with us. Take a look at our website, h2o.ai, and you can also follow the link in the chat to request your free and personalized H2O intro pack. So we have a guest speaker today. Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
Hi, Ivan.
Hi. You are a strategic advisor on AI and founder and CEO of Greenhouse Intelligence, a company that provides consulting services to help organizations through their AI journey. And today, this session is going to be about maximizing the value from AI. So thanks for being with us today for this exciting topic. Before I hand it over to Andrew, I would like to go over the following housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the questions tab. Andrew will take some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. And this session today is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be available on the H2O YouTube channel after the presentation is over. And now I'd like to hand it over to Andrew.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ivan. So as Ivan mentioned, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how data scientists can really help drive momentum with their own organizations for the deployment of AI. Excuse me. So a little bit about myself, first of all. My name's Andrew Burgess. I'm the founder of Greenhouse Intelligence. I'm also the author of the book you can see there, The Executive Guide to Artificial Intelligence, which was published by Paul Grove Macmillan just over a year ago, which is really an introduction for business people to AI. Also written a book around legal service outsourcing, various magazines, etc. And I've given evidence at the all-party parliamentary group on AI here in the UK Parliament. I'm also visiting senior fellow at Loughborough University for AI and RPA, and also resident in expert in residence, at Imperial College in London for artificial intelligence. And in terms of the work that I do, this is just some of my clients. A lot of the work is around helping organizations understand AI, what's the art of the possible, and helping them create their AI strategies. And that's some of the work I'm going to be talking to you about during this webinar. So in the spirit of a good Netflix series, I'm going to explain the context of this series and what's happened previously. Last month, I had a webinar, or held a webinar here that was aimed particularly at business people. It helped them understand artificial intelligence in non-technical terms and what was the art of the possible for AI within their organization. The idea of that was to generate the right sort of excitement and demand for AI that wasn't clouded in the usual sort of hype and marketing froth that we see. And in that session, I tried to answer 4 questions for them, some of which I'll be covering in this session, but this time from the perspective of the data scientist rather than the business person. So those 4 questions were, what the bleep is AI anyway? And within this section, I spoke about a non-technical framework that I've created to better understand what AI is, and I'm going to cover some of that in the session today. Question 2 was, is AI really everything it's cracked up to be? And in this section, I used some relevant case studies and use cases of where AI is being used in business. Question 3 was, what could possibly go wrong? And I talked about some of the risks that can present themselves that are very specific to AI, including opaqueness, bias, and naivety. And again, I'll cover some of those in the session. And then finally, what do they do with all this newfound knowledge? And this was really the section that covered how they start their AI journey. But I imagine as data scientists, etc., you're sitting there thinking, well, that's all very well, but I'm a data scientist, analyst, developer, delete as appropriate, and my organization just doesn't get AI and all the amazing things it can do. And this is a very common problem. Having all these data scientists on hand is a bit like being armed to the teeth or the latest weaponry and having no one to fight, or perhaps less aggressively, having gourmet chefs available and declaring that you're not really hungry. And so, as well as creating these brilliant AI models, applications, etc., the data scientist, the analyst, the developer also has another role within the organization, that of articulating the benefits of your craft to the business, so that the organization can exploit all of the benefits of AI. So in other words, how do you talk AI to a business person? And that's really going to be the theme of this webinar. So, and it should be obvious, but business people don't want to hear about algorithms or Python libraries. And of course, it's highly unlikely that they're going to really understand them, but they do want to understand what is going on. And if they don't understand it, or even worse, if they fear the technology, then nothing's going to happen. So the following slides show how I explain AI to business people and how I would therefore build momentum for AI within an organization. So hopefully some of this will be helpful to you as well. And in doing that, there's 8 steps I'm going to take you through. The first one, explain AI in simple terms. So as I mentioned before, I've created a framework, which is kind of the core of the book that I wrote, that's used to explain the capabilities of AI. So this is not around how AI works, but really what it can do. And that's the thing that's going to be important for business people. And I always start with these 3 boxes you can see here. So, and these are kind of the meta objectives for AI, the 3 really big things that we're trying to achieve with AI. So the first one is around capturing information. Once we've captured that information, then we want to understand what is happening, and ideally after that, we want to understand why something's happening as well. I also talk within that around the differences between unstructured data and structured data, and you'll know the difference to that and how important that is. And then within each of these different sections, there's these different capabilities, and you can use your own language in terms of how you describe these, but I usually talk about things like image recognition. So, is this a picture of a dog or not? That sort of thing. Then speech recognition. So, and at this point, what I make clear is that with speech recognition at this point, all we're doing is understanding the words that are being spoken. So we're not looking at intent yet, because that comes in the next section, what is happening. And one of the things that's important is as people understand these capabilities, they understand that if you're going to build an application that's useful in a business environment, then you've probably got to combine a number of these different capabilities together. And also, we'll understand that speech recognition is part of natural language processing, natural language understanding, but we want to pick out this particular capability because it's that part around capturing information. Then we have what I call search, which is really the ability for the AI to classify documents and then to extract the metadata from the documents. So for example, you could be looking at contracts and classifying them into employment contracts and commercial contracts and lease contracts, and then being able to extract the metadata, like who are the parties, what's the value, what's the termination dates, etc. It's that sort of thing. And that's very useful, particularly if people are looking at automation and implementing RPA as well, because the robots will need that structured information to be able to process. So that's all dealing with unstructured data. But AI is also very good at making sense of structured data. And if you've got lots of structured data, kind of this big data models, then clustering can be used to kind of start to make sense of that. So once we've captured the information, we want to start to understand what is happening. So as I said before, this is where this idea of intent comes in. So we'll be using natural language understanding, typically seen in things like chatbots, to help people understand the words that are being said. What's the intent? What's that person mean? And then also being able to communicate back to them in natural language as well. And then this is idea of problem solving or reasoning. These are where the AI needs to optimize to a specific solution, and typically this would be around reinforcement learning type applications here. But things like route planning would be a good one, or shift patterns, or looking for ideal molecules that have a particular action with a protein. That sort of idea. And then finally in this section, we've got prediction, so what's going to happen next. And this is, clearly a core part of what AI can achieve, and one of the biggest applications of it within business. And it's important to realize a lot of that prediction is based on the clustering approach that we've achieved in the first stage. So that's all what's happening, and everything I've described so far you'll understand as artificial narrow intelligence. And it's really important to make the point that AI is very good at doing each of these capabilities itself, but is not very good at then combining that and getting what we have in the third stage, which is this idea of understanding and cognition. It's what the brain is very good at, putting concepts together, creating new concepts, cognition. So the first two columns are what's available now, so people can go out and buy that, they can go and build it, etc. But when we want to understand why something's happening, then this is where we're still in the world of science fiction and research labs, and the question is whether we'll ever get to that stage or not. So it's very important to make the difference between these different types of AI and how we can build up the different narrow capabilities into a useful application, but we're never really going to achieve that complete understanding that a human brain can have. So that's a very quick run through of the framework. Obviously, you can take more time on different areas as well, but I think it gives people an understanding of what an application can do and how it might be broken down into those different capabilities. So once we've explained what AI is, then we need to look at the positives. So what we can achieve with AI. And the first thing I want to declare is that I'm an optimist. So for me, this is a glass half full. And interestingly, if you it looks like the internet agrees with me as well, because if you Google glass half full, you get 64 million responses. If you Google glass half empty, you only get 8 million responses. So interesting result there. But I think it's really important to focus on the positives first of all, look at what the outcomes might be. And AI has a number of different benefits, and I think it's important that you look across all those different benefits, starting with things like customer satisfaction. So you can get improved customer quality, service quality, responsiveness, and those could be through things like predicting demand, answering customer queries automatically, and being able to do that 24/7. We can look at risk mitigation as a benefit, and that can be through improved and more comprehensive monitoring and assessment of risks. Interesting example there with Deutsche Bank, who use AI to essentially listen in to all the calls that their investment bankers are making with their clients and transcribing those calls and looking for the patterns within those calls that might identify risk of non-compliance or fraud. And rather than previously having to listen to only a sample of those, the AI can listen to every call that's happening. So the amount of money that goes through their hands every day is huge. So it's a huge benefit of risk mitigation for Deutsche Bank in using that. Cost reduction, this is the one that business people tend to focus on first of all, but really in AI we're looking at, I think, some of the other benefits that will be much more valuable to them. But there are cost reduction benefits, generally through the use of less labor, but also process efficiency. So we can do things like increasing supply chain efficiencies, which can be very valuable. We can implement chatbots, which can save some contact center resources, etc. So there are some good benefits on that. Loss mitigation is an interesting one. So this could be things, for example, through improved debt recovery, fraud detection. Companies like PayPal would use that to identify fraudulent transactions, and they've implemented some very interesting models that have reduced their fraudulent transactions from 1.32% to 0.32%. So a huge benefit for PayPal there. Then we have kind of a connected thing, what I call revenue leakage mitigation. So this is through things like reducing customer churn. So revenue that would have been there, but it's leaked out for various reasons. So AI is very good at, as you will probably know, in being able to predict customer churn. It's also very good at in the contact center as well. So listening into calls, identifying issues before they turn into really bad issues as well. So using natural language understanding and transcription there. And then finally, and probably the most valuable benefit, I think, from AI is around revenue generation. This is kind of the holy grail, and this is where most value, I think, can come. So this can be used through cross-selling, upselling, being able to offer completely new services as well. And I've used this approach with a couple of not-for-profit organisations that I've worked with in the past, where we've taken their supporters and predicted their propensity to donate, so that the campaigns that go out can be much more targeted, both in getting more revenue back in from donations, but also less cost, because we're being more targeted within who we're sending the emails and letters to as well. So I think it's really important with all of this to focus on the outcomes. So as I said, that charity example I just said, it's like, what's the benefit going to be to the charity? It's going to be these increased donations. They don't necessarily need to understand about the machine learning algorithms that are going on in the background, but they need to understand how it fits into that framework, what it's going to do, but most importantly, what the outcome is going to be. But having said that, we don't want to get too carried away. And we've seen people like Elon Musk over-promising and under-delivering on a range of different things. Most recently with implanting brain sensors into pigs. But we want to try and keep this very well grounded. So one thing I really focus on and try and look at with clients is understanding initially their AI maturity. So this is the way I usually approach things with clients, and understanding across all the different departments where they are in terms of their understanding and deployment of AI. And I use a scale of 1 to 5, and if some of you are familiar with the CMM model for software development, which Carnegie Mellon developed, it's a very similar approach where you've got different characteristics, different ways that is expressing itself within the organization. You can really then judge where they are on this scale of 1 to 5, 1 from traditional analytics, no AI, to 5 where AI is embedded really in everything that they do. It's part of the fabric of the company. But you can do that by, as I say, by department. So starting to have those conversations with the head of customer services, the head of operations, etc., allows them to see where they are and for you to understand exactly where your starting point is. But then most importantly, I think you want to work out where they want to be. And not everyone's going to be wanting to be at level 5. That might be quite nice, but there's a lot of cost involved in that, and it doesn't necessarily warrant the cost to achieve those benefits. So they might want to be at level 3 or level 4 instead. But the key thing is that the gap between the current situation and the ambition is really the scope that you've got to work in. And so to get from there to there means that you've got to do certain things with AI to achieve this. And that's good, because that starts to set the expectations for what AI can do. It manages so people don't get too overexcited with AI. They don't think that it's going to solve world peace. They know exactly where they're going to get to if they do these certain things. But also, point 4 here is we don't want to ignore the risks, and it's really important to explain the specific risks to AI, because there are quite a few. And I always say, with AI, with great power comes great responsibility. So we need to be able to manage all of these as well. And the ones I usually pick up on and explain to people, the first one is this problem of black box, which I'm sure you understand, the idea of opaqueness and the inability for some algorithms to explain their logic in terms of how they come to a particular conclusion. And this is important in regulated industries as well, where if people are applying for loans, for example, they might want to have it explained to them why their loan was rejected. And some algorithms won't be able to do that. But as well as understanding that the problem exists and why it's a problem, then the business needs to know that there are various solutions or workarounds to this. And some of these are technical solutions, and some of them are less technical. But the core thing is the problem isn't technical, but the solutions probably are. There will be payoffs with that. So, for example, I usually explain that the more complex the algorithm you use, the more opaque it's going to be. So we can balance that with having simpler algorithms, but we might not have the accuracy that we had with the more complex ones. But as you'll know, there's explainability built into a lot of libraries, and and also into H2O as well, that help you with this explainability, and that's getting better. If I'd done this webinar 2 years ago, there was less scope for doing these sorts of explainability ideas as well. So this is something that's going to improve over time as well, but something that just the business needs to be aware of. Another risk that I often explain to people is around bias, and this is generally a hard problem to solve. And I usually give the example of the particular data set you can see here, or a sample. This is a sample of the data set of labeled faces in the wild, which has 13,000 face photographs. And previously, companies like Google and Facebook and Baidu had been using this data set to train their facial recognition algorithms. But although the picture you can see here is just a sample of all of the faces that are in the data set, it is particularly representative. And you will notice, hopefully, that 83% of the photos in the data set were of white people, and nearly 78% were of men. So what that means is that if you, for example, are a woman of color, then those algorithms being trained on this particular data set won't be as accurate as if you're a white man. Now, there was a big issue around this. It made lots of reports, etc., and people have done lots about it, but there are still lots of data sets around now that are inherently biased. And this is just as big a problem, I think, for tech teams as it is for the business people. And it goes right back to the culture of the company and even the hiring policies as well. Some of these things you need to get right down to the root cause of it. So if you're a data scientist now, you're working in a team of data scientists in your organization, and everybody in your team are white men, then you have a problem, and that needs to be solved, because however well you try and come up with technical solutions, there will be unconscious bias built into the algorithms that you are building. So you need to kind of go down to the root cause of that. Another risk that I talk about as well, which is often forgotten, is that of naivety. So if you go back to the example of image recognition, and is this a picture of a dog or not? And by the way, this is a picture of my dog. But when you're asking the AI to say whether this is a picture of a dog or not, the data scientist understands that actually all you're doing is you've got patterns of pixels which you are comparing to lots of other patterns of pixels that somebody has previously labeled dog or not dog. And the AI is just saying there's a close enough match pattern between this pattern of pixels and the previous patterns of pixels that were labeled dog, that I have a reasonable confidence that I can label this picture dog as well. And that's all that's happening. It's just very, very clever maths that's going on in the background. But it's really important to understand that the AI doesn't understand the concept of a dog. We, as human beings, we know that dogs are living creatures, that they're pets, that we can love them, all that sort of stuff. AI doesn't understand that. If you'd have labeled all those pictures of dog as elephant, it would have labeled this picture as an elephant. So we've got to be really careful, particularly if we don't understand the maths behind all of this. We've really got to be careful we don't anthropomorphize the AI to give it more credibility and more power than it actually does. So a really important point to make this, I think, generally forgotten in the excitement. Another risk that I think is really important to manage is not to get overexcited. Do not get carried away with AI. And a good example of that is facial recognition. And I always say to my clients, just because you can do something with AI doesn't mean you should do it. And this is an issue for business teams and tech teams as well. So sometimes the solution can be so overwhelmingly exciting, stroke profitable, stroke advantageous, that the ethics are simply swept aside in the chase for this great solution. But as I said before, great power comes great responsibility. So we need to be really careful that we are constantly taking a step back and asking ourselves, should we be doing this? Are people being disadvantaged from this? Are the algorithms biased? Are they not explainable, etc.? So constantly reviewing again and again, and also particularly with the business people that might see just the the outcomes from all of this. Yes, we're going to increase profit by X%. Is that still the right thing to do? So one of the things I advise clients to do is try and identify what I call moments of matter as a starting point. And by moments of matter, I mean things that should never be automated, should never be use AI on. So, for example, if you're in an HR department, there's lots of activities that you might want to automate in terms of the queries that are coming in. People are asking about how many days holiday have I got left, all those sorts of things. But if an employee rings in and their partner has just died and they need some time off, that's not something you want to have answered with a chatbot. That's got to be a person. So that I would describe as a moment that matter. And as an organization, I think it's very good to start with the moments matter that you can then ring fence off and say, these activities we are never going to automate. We're never going to apply AI. We're never going to apply automation tools to them, because those are the moments that matter. Everything else then is up for grabs. I think that's a good starting point, a good way to control the organization not getting out of control, not getting overexcited. So all of that so far is really setting the scene for the organization, but now we actually need to start doing something. So what you really need to do is get an AI strategy in place, because once you've explained the art of the possible to the business and the benefits, etc., then sometimes this happens and they say, great, how can we use artificial intelligence in our business, or even get me an AI? But this is the wrong question to ask. Obviously, it's just like in the days when mobile apps were making their entrance into the marketplace. People say, we need an app, and you'd say, well, what do you want it to do? And they say, we don't care, we just need an app. And it's the same thing now with AI. People just think they need AI for AI's sake, and that's the most dangerous thing to happen, because they will just be disappointed at the end of the day, and you'll lose the momentum for all the other applications for AI that would have actually added value to it. So instead of saying, how can we use AI in our business, they should be asking, what are the business challenges? What are the objectives within the business? And then can AI help deliver them or solve those challenges? So you're kind of turning the question around. And that's quite a hard thing to do. But the approach works because you're starting then to build up this AI strategy. And I've kind of develop the approach in one slide here, just so you can see overall how it happens. And none of it's rocket science, but it's just important to lay out the approach that you need to take, because aligning those opportunities for AI with the business challenges and objectives is fundamental to getting that success, that momentum within the organization. So if you understand the objectives of your business, and if you don't understand them, then that's problems that are too difficult for me to solve. But hopefully the business understands what their key objectives are, and they might be, for example, reducing cost base, reducing risk of exposure to risk, improving customer service, those sorts of ideas. And the organization might have a number of initiatives in place that they are using to tackle those. So no new hires, reduction in error rates, improve average handling time, those sorts of ideas. And then you, as the data scientist stroke consultant, need to be coming in and saying, well, what AI projects can we do that can impact those different initiatives? And some projects, some opportunities might just impact one of those, some may impact a number, and there may be obviously some initiatives that AI just can't impact at all, which is fine. But it's important to understand what the complete landscape is. What are those projects? And once you start to do that, then you can start to think about what the technologies are. So AI, and I've talked about AI as in very broad terms, but I use it as this concept of it's the full range of technologies, from chatbots at one end to predictive analytics the other, and everything in between. So what are the different AI technologies, based around that framework that I talked about earlier, that you need to bring in? And some of those will be common across different projects as well. You might need some third parties to help you do this, whether those are vendors or other consultants. And then you can really wrap a plan around that. And that's really the embryonic part of your AI strategy right there. You've got the business strategy coming in one side, you've got the AI capabilities coming in the other, and matching the two is where the magic happens. So the next stage, and this is really where the clever stuff comes in, it's really the ability to identify what those AI opportunities are that match those different objectives from the business. And I usually start to build up a spreadsheet that looks something like this. And within every organization, there's usually between at least 30 up to 60 different opportunities for AI and other automation technologies within that organization. What I do is I map that against the different AI technologies, and I map that against those business objectives for that organization. So for example, they might have 4 different KPIs that they measure everything against. So measure your AI opportunities against those 4 KPIs. And also other things like how easy is it to implement? So you can start to prioritize your list of opportunities, and you're building up a pipeline of these opportunities that you can then start to work on. And I usually try and summarize all of that into a heat map, which you can see here. So here's an example of one where, again, you've got different departments within the organization, the different types of AI technology, and then where those opportunities are sitting, so you can see which parts of the business have the most opportunity and what type of technology you would need to do that. But also as well where the benefits sit. So at this stage, it's still very high level, just using these booze balls as a proxy for value. So a full circle, there's lots of value, and empty circle there's no value. So you can see which areas and which parts of those KPIs that we're trying to target we're actually hitting. And the important thing of doing this heat map, I think, one it allows you to discuss at a high level, the top-down level of where those opportunities are within the business, kind of the art of the possible. But also you can start to build up the roadmap here, because you might be saying, actually, we've got a lot of opportunities, for example, here in research. So maybe we want to start doing everything in the research department and cover all the different technologies in there. Or perhaps we've got lots of opportunities in prediction or optimization. So let's start looking at those and building the tools for that. And then we can start to impact every different department in the organization. But also let's look at what the priorities for the business are and which ones. So this starts that discussion, and it's the discussion that's really important that helps you build that roadmap. Which brings me on to the 6th point here of how you build that roadmap. And the strategy that I always use is this one of think big but act small. So have that vision, have that strategy, but start to do things that are very practical and achievable in the short term. So what that might mean, you can look over the first 6 months, for example, and again, by the different departments, start to build in where we can start to add real value. So there might be some proof of concepts in there. So looking at going back to that pipeline of opportunities, what are the ones at the top that are going to give us the most value and are easiest to implement? And those are the ones we're going to be starting to do our proof of concepts with. But there might be other activities as well that we need to do some data transformation or data cleansing on. So let's put that in there. There might be other organizational changes we have to do as well. So let's put that in there as well. But really focusing on the next 6 months, what's achievable within that, and to really demonstrate momentum within that organization. You can see here as well at the bottom, I've also got education within that. So how do we bring the executive team on board by talking about those capabilities as well, so they can be part of that whole journey. So that's the short-term piece, that's the act small piece. But the thinking big means that you have to think across that whole life cycle as well. So at the moment, I've just talked about the AI strategy and education piece, so understanding the art of the possible and building in the proof of values. But after that, then we need to develop those models. We need AI models that can be used in production. And then ideally, we need to build some sort of managed service around that, where we're looking at optimizing the models on an ongoing basis, making sure that the data feeds are secure, that they're integrated into the applications, etc. So we need to take that long-term view as well. And as you know, a lot of organizations will jump straight into proof of value. It might be successful, but I think, now what do we do? We've got a spreadsheet with some nice numbers on, but where do we go from here? And because they haven't taken that long-term view of how they're actually going to productionize the systems, they kind of get stuck in that proof of concept loop. So one of the things that you'll need to do as well alongside this and looking forward is technology roadmap as well. So if you haven't got the tools and the infrastructure in place, what will you need to be able to enable all of those opportunities you've identified earlier on? And there'll be lots of criteria that you're building your technology roadmap on. It needs to be scalable, elastic, reusable, probably cloud agnostic as well. But you'll know what's best for your organization. But it's important to bring that into the mix, because the business needs to understand that there are tools and investment that's required in order to enable all those benefits that we've just described. Point 7 is then looking at all the options for development, for build. And if you're a business person, this is what they see when they think about AI and how to start the AI journey. They see all these logos of all these vendors, thousands of them out there, all claiming that they've got AI. They're all claiming that they can do magical things with their particular things. And what that does, that puts the business person off, because they just don't know where to start, and they get confused and they get into this paralysis of not being able to move forward. So one of the ways I explain this to business people, I try and simplify it down into 3 different approaches they can take. So, of course, there are the vendor approaches, and if the vendor's solution can provide exactly what your requirement is, then there's no reason why you shouldn't go to the vendor to do that. You need to cut through all the hype, and you can help the business people do that by identifying the right vendors within this. But there are some very good, essentially off-the-shelf solutions that you can apply to the business, and that might be the simplest thing and a good way to build momentum, because they can see results quickly. At the other end of the scale, you might have some unique data sets that nobody else has. You might have the opportunity to build something that will give the business real competitive advantage. So therefore, you need to take this bespoke approach. You might need to use all the coding tools that you can have, and data scientists, developers, etc., to do this. And it's likely to be a long-term project. It's likely to cost quite a bit of money, but the rewards will be great. But it's also important to remember, in the middle there, there's this other option which I call configure, which is really, where you might be taking some off-the-shelf algorithms from TensorFlow or Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, speech-to-text piece that is not necessarily going to provide competitive advantage, but you need it within the application you're doing. So why not use the standard approach? And using tools like, obviously, things like H2O, AutoML tools to help train your models and identify the right algorithms to use as well, I think is important. So when you're looking at how to do this, don't naturally go to the bespoke solution, which might suit your skills better, but make sure that there are other solutions out there which might give value quicker and deliver momentum to the whole AI program within the organization as well. The final point on the list is to keep measuring and checking. And if you go back to that AI life cycle that I mentioned before, it's really important to have that feedback loop. So how do we get continuous improvement and optimization of everything that we're doing in that? And a lot of that's around governance. So as your program is starting to build momentum, make sure that you've got regular meetings of the program team, the steering committee, whatever it is, and these need to be cross-functional and regular to monitor the progress. And that's assuming you've already got the strategy in place, pipeline of opportunities and the business cases. So you need to review that pipeline of opportunities on a regular basis, because the business strategy may change over time. So you need to make sure that those opportunities are still aligned with your business strategy and the challenges of the business at the time. So don't be afraid to scrub ideas off. Then you need to be able to monitor those business cases, demonstrate that there's clear return on investment from them, and be able to have a dashboard that simply displays what that benefit is. So how do you summarize the benefits to them? And a dashboard is a really good way. Don't show the business people a confusion matrix, for example. That's not really going to work. But what are the outcomes? What are the benefits that we're seeing from this? We also want to be able to scan the landscape for new technologies. You know, AI is a very fast-moving technology, and things are developing, you know, almost on a weekly basis. So it's really important to make sure that you future-proof everything that you do, that you shouldn't be scared to say, actually, there's a new technology that fundamentally changes the way that we did something previously, so we need to remodel that or rebuild it. I think that's very important. And finally, ensure that the organization can attract and retain the best talent, the best data scientists as well. And you know, this is going to be important to you if you're a data scientist. But what are the things within the business that will make sure that data scientists are retained? So it might be around having interesting work to do, and hopefully, if you've been involved in that identification of the excuse me, the AI opportunities, then there will be plenty to be getting on with. But also you've got the right tools in place because you built that technology roadmap as well alongside it. And those are things that are going to be able to allow you to attract really good colleagues and retain them as well within the organization. So it's really important as you have this long-term view and you have all these different governance actions in place as you build out your AI program. So that's the 8 points that I wanted to cover today, starting with really, the ability to educate people, particularly senior management, on what AI is, remove that fear, give them the understanding to the level that they require it, so that it kind of frees those barriers that they had before. Focus on the positives, look at the particular benefits and look at those across all the different areas. But don't get carried away with that. Don't get overexcited. There's so much hype and froth around with AI at the moment. Don't get sucked into that. Remember that AI is just very clever maths. It's just a tool that people can use. You almost want to make AI boring for your organization. But also talk about the risks as well. Make sure you cover those as well. The last thing you want to do is build up this excitement, go down a route and you're building unethical applications, because that's not going to help anybody. Then this really important stage of creating that AI strategy. Think about the opportunities, how they align with the business strategy, the business objectives, because those are the ones that are really going to make the difference in how you go forward. And taking it forward, think big, act small, look at the short-term things that you can do that are going to be achievable, build momentum within your organization. That's going to make the difference, but don't forget that even if you're building POCs, you've got to productionize those at some point, assuming they're successful. And if this is really successful, then you're going to be having lots and lots of applications for AI, and you've got to have that infrastructure and that, these deployment platforms, the security protocols in place, etc. And if you're going to get to that, the maturity at the right-hand side of that scale that I showed you earlier, then you've got to start thinking about that very early on as you start deploying these different applications to keep control of them. Look at all the options in terms of how you apply, how you bring AI into the organization, and that's where you may need to bring in your procurement sourcing departments as well. Don't just think about it's going to be bespoke build. Look at the vendor options, look at the configuration options as well. Each opportunity you identify will have different requirements and potentially different solutions. And then finally, as I said, it's around governance. It's keep measuring and checking. That's the thing that's going to keep the momentum going, keep it front of people's mind, and show them the benefit, demonstrate the results to them, and that's going to keep the momentum going. So those are all the points I wanted to mention. I just wanted to finish off with one slide that which kind of hopefully summarizes it all up. And if you think about a very simplified Venn diagram of the business people and the data team, and assuming a lot of people here are on the data team, it's the overlap between those two where the real magic happens. That's where we get the real benefits of AI. Anything that happens just in the data team or is attempted to happen just in the business is likely to fail. That's where momentum stops. That's where you hear about lots of failed AI projects. Bringing the two together is where the magic happens. And the approach, the tool that you need to do that is this AI strategy that I've described so far. So that's the approach you need to take. So hopefully that's given you a really good idea of how to talk AI to the business and how to deliver momentum, hopefully how to allow your skills as a data scientist to really flourish within an organization to make sure that you're doing valuable work that's going to benefit everybody. So thank you for that. Those are my contact details, and also contact details of Ivan at H2O. We've got around 15 minutes left, so I think we'll look at the chat and bring Ivan back in, see if there's any questions that we can cover from the attendees.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. So we do have a few questions.
Sorry, Ivan, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I think it's just me. There we go.
No problem, thanks. So the first question is, what are the key drivers of engagement that end up making such projects appreciated and useful to the whole company?
Yeah, so I think the key thing, and hopefully this come out during the session, is around aligning those opportunities for AI with the business objectives and the challenges. I think if you don't have that, then you're just going to fail. Then you get into the world of AI for AI's sake. And you know, that's very tempting for a lot of organizations now, but it's just not the way to have sustainable AI. I also think you need that understanding, particularly of the senior executives, so being able to explain to them those capabilities of AI in terms that they understand, so don't go down those rabbit holes of technology, of technical explaining, just keep at those capabilities. Have that vision of what you want to do, have that strategy, and really importantly, from those, the business case should really fall out of that. If you haven't got a business case, then you know, you shouldn't be doing anything anyway. So I think that's really important that you go through that work. It's really important to invest time in that before you start to then develop these opportunities with AI within the organization.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Do you see both top-down and bottom-up strategies compatible?
That's an interesting question. I mean, you could argue that bottom-up strategies are essentially tactics, but if I can, let's assume we're looking at this. So top-down is kind of the normal approach, but I think the bottom-up piece of what I described is that, you know, if you remember the diagram, it's actually side to side on the diagram that I showed, but you've got the business objectives, you've got the AI opportunities, and it's where they meet together. So it's that identifying the opportunities. So as I said, you know, you get a list of 30 to 60 different opportunities for AI within the organization. That's a lot of detail. That's really the bottom-up piece. So to do that, you've got to be talking to the people that are doing the work. You know, you've got to talk to the head of customer services, the head of operations, the head of finance, the head of IT, all of those people. Sit with people that are doing the work to really understand where the opportunities are. So that if there is a bottom-up approach, it's really from that piece, and that's where the top-down meets the bottom-up, and going back and checking, as I said in that spreadsheet, is like what are the business benefits of doing this, and without that matching to the business benefits and business strategy, then all you're really doing is just identifying tactical opportunities. So yeah, so it's about the identifying opportunities. It goes from takes it from being tactical into a bottom-up strategy, I guess. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. Another question. So what are the key metrics or benchmarks against which executives should assess the viability of a business case for AI?
So I think starting with that list of benefits that I showed, I think, you know, I had 6 different types of benefits there. So I think it's important to look across all of those. A lot of organizations will be focusing on cost as the key one, but one of the things you need to be able to do is introduce all these other ideas and suggesting that potentially cost isn't the key driver here. Well, not necessarily. You know, things like revenue generation. You know, if you're implementing some AI or RPA, whatever it is, and you're going to save 2 people or 5 people or whatever it is, that can save you, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds. But if you can increase your revenue by 5%, then that might be millions of pounds as well. So think about where you can leverage AI the greatest. I think the other one that's important as well is that risk mitigation piece as well. You know, this is important, and the Deutsche Bank example I gave, you know, billions of pounds go through Deutsche Bank, you know, probably every week. So being able to identify non-compliance and fraud across every call, every deal that's being made is really maximising the mitigation of those very expensive risks. So the challenge with the risk mitigation is very difficult to measure. But you know, if you think about it as just what's the impact if this risk happens, and what's the likely frequency of that, then that's your starting point. So you do need to be able to put numbers against this, and you know, they will always end up as pound signs or dollar signs or whatever. But you need to go through that process of doing that. But think about all the different areas, and I think particularly with AI, the business case is really, really important, because particularly right now, it's a big leap of faith for companies to start deploying AI. And if you think about it as well, that a proof of concept is actually quite difficult in AI, because you almost need, you know, if you've got lots and lots of data, you almost need all of the data to give you the result that you want. It's very difficult to say, I'm just going to take 10% of the data to see if I can repeat that, because 10% might not be anywhere near enough. So you almost have to go full in to prove the value that you're trying to prove in the first place. So this leap of faith that you need to engender within people, I think, is really important. So the business case has to be really, really strong within that. So think about all the different opportunities that you've got. Don't just look at cost, look at all those other ones as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That actually leads to the next question, that was, have AI and ML strategies moved on from a POC level to business and corporation level, and how deep is the willingness to accept machine learning by businesses?
Yeah, I think, you know, it is a fact of life that a lot of organizations have tried AI, you know, mainly because they think they should be doing it. You know, competitors are doing it, whatever, and they've kind of dived into this. We must do a proof of concept on this, and they brought in some consultants, or they've tried it themselves, etc., or a vendor, and they get caught in this cycle, this kind of vortex of not being able to escape from doing a POC, and that's a lot of companies at the moment. And I saw it, you know, I also advise on robotic process automation. I saw that as well, you know, the same sort of thing 3 or 4 years ago. Everyone tries it, and then for whatever reason they can't escape from that. They can't build enough of a business case from it, or they haven't thought about how they're then going to productionize these proof of concepts. But what they need to have is that think big piece. So it's having that vision, the strategy, and that's understanding with that particular proof of concept, how do we measure success, and then how do we take it from being that proof of concept into development and into production as well. So what's next? Once we've got our spreadsheet of some nice prediction numbers or whatever, what do we do with this next? Because it's only really going to be valuable if there's somebody using that information on a day-to-day basis at their computer, and they're taking actions on that information. There's no point in having a spreadsheet that's produced and nobody looks at it, just wasting your time. So you've got to think about how it's going to actually be used on a day-to-day basis. And I think also another way to kind of increase that willingness of the business is that having that pipeline of opportunities as well. So that means you can create momentum within the business. It's not just a case of, we'll try one thing, oh, that's worked, right, let's start and see what's next on the list, and spending another 6 months doing it, because you just, you know, there'll be another shiny new thing that the organization will start looking at. So as soon as you've got one in place and running, right, what's the next one, what's the next one? You have this loop, and each time you're developing something, you're building capability, you're building AI capability within the organizational momentum as well. So I think that's the way to kind of take that leap from proof of concept into production.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I think we have time for one last question. So how can C-suite and business leaders find the right consulting partner to help them in their AI fluency?
That's an easy one. The contact details are there on the screen. No, but seriously, I think about, if you are going to bring in external parties, think about what those organizations are going to be selling to you. So if you think about AI fluency, you think about education. So how do we get the senior executive to understand what we're trying to do? And there are people that are good at that, and then some people will just use that as a loss leader to trying to get lots of other work done. So find people that are actually good at doing that education piece, that are selling you the education, not trying to sell you something else instead. And people that are able to pitch it at the right level. There's a challenge as well, because you need to cover all levels within the organization. There's the C-level people who need to take that high view, but they need, as I said before, they need to understand it. They need to get through that gap of understanding, because nothing will happen if they don't understand it. So you need people that can talk at the C-level, but you also need people that can talk to the people whose jobs are going to change because they're now using AI as well. So they need to be brought into the process as well. So think about how people can articulate at all levels. And then finally, I think it's just around cultural fit. It's really, really important. You know, there's a huge change program. If you're doing AI at this scale, it will require lots and lots of change. So it's not just about technology, it's about bringing the organization along with you. So if you're having partners come in, make sure that the cultural fit is really good, that you have advisors that you can trust, advisors that can move with you, that are agile, that can respond to your particular needs, understand your particular problems as well. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for taking the time today, and thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. We have many other events in the agenda, so stay tuned and have a great day, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.